The Arctic Monkeys have gone from sounding like this to sounding like this.
Can we please be absolutely sure that there's a mirror?
It's a transformation that has taken place over the course of 7 albums and about 15 years. But change is good. Some of the best and most relevant artists today got there precisely because they evolved their sounds, and evolve frequently. The Arctic Monkeys have experimented sonically on nearly every record, but 3 of their albums in particular have been pivotal in advancing their sound: Humbug, AM, and Tranquility Base Hotel Casino. They're the very reason we've gone from this
They said it changes when the sun goes down. Yeah, they said it changes when the sun goes down.
to this.
So predictable, I know what you're thinking.
Arriving at a sound that fell in line with the garage rock revival of the early 2000s, the Sheffield boys were making dancey punk rock tunes detailing the late-night antics of northern English teens. They wrote about what they knew.
And up rolls the riot van, and these lads just wind the coppers up.
The most somber tune on the album, Riot Van, comes right at the center point of the record, showing that they understood the need for a bit of a breather in a tracklist otherwise filled with pretty energetic material. The heavy tunes went a bit heavier, and softer moments became more stripped down on Favorite Worst Nightmare. The album begins with the breakneck pace set by Brianstorm, but each track thereafter eases in tempo until we reach Only Ones Who Know.
You're the only ones who know.
A gently strummed atmospheric love song sung in a croon we've come to know in some of the Monkees' latest offerings. The momentum picks up again with a few more dance punk tracks before settling into the album's closer, 505.
I'm going back to 505.
A track featuring Turner's first use of a keyboard in their sound, but also a great example of breaking their own ceiling and showing just how dynamic they could be.
But I crumble completely when you cry.
The Arctic Monkeys took a short hiatus, but Alex Turner, along with Miles Kane, Favorite Worst Nightmare producer James Ford, and string arranger Owen Pallett, started a supergroup known as the Last Shadow Puppets. Their majestic 60s-inspired sound featured the 22-piece London Metropolitan Orchestra.
And your love is standing next to me. It's standing next to me.
I've seen many people saying that tracks from The Car sound like the band auditioning for the next Bond theme, but you could say Turner was crafting the indie soundtrack to a Bond film here, more than a decade before even Tranquility Base arrived.
Innocence and arrogance entwined.
When it came time to start on a new Monkees record, the boys knew they'd need to evolve or their punk novelty would wear thin. They'd met Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age while touring Favorite Worst Nightmare and would get along with him quite well.
Whilst we'd perhaps tried to hatch a plan, we were sort of struggling and had written all these different tunes, and we just sort of needed someone to come and help us crack the code.
Once they'd had new demos ready and were in search of new sounds, Homme invited the Sheffield boys to his desert studio in California to trade production notes and record new sounds. They'd grown an appreciation for the music of Nick Cave, the heavy metal riffs of Black Sabbath, but also the laid-back feel of Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Oh, Susie Q, baby, I love you. Susie Q.
First time I heard Susie Q was, I think Josh played it. The feel of the song was something we wanted to try and recreate without ripping it off. That was one we kind of listened to quite a lot. We were all that into it straight away.
Experimenting with new guitar effects and keyboards, the album carried a darker but relaxed desert rock tone.
My propeller.
You can hear a Queens of the Stone Age type riff in what is still the Monkees' heaviest track ever. Almost every track featured the presence of Alex on a keyboard, a nod towards the piano-driven future that was first sparked by the album's closer, The Jeweler's Hands.
But you know what it's like to hold the jeweler's hand.
This song is the first time I've written anything at a piano, which I think leads you to a whole different network of conclusions. And I think that was always, that'll be the last track. Like it should end this record, but it's sort of nodding towards the future perhaps, but it just seemed like that was as far as it should go in this sonically. And let's now plug the gaps to get to there, and that's sort of what we did.
Alex's vocals became slower, smoother, and his way of singing began masking some of his Northern English accent.
Yeah, I let him go the long way round. I smelt your scent on the seatbelt.
Turner would also spend more time writing lyrics for the record, more personal topics, but purposely made obscure.
Snapping the excitement if I pack away the laughter.
It's written with a veil over it that allows you almost to put more emotion or like personal.
Their desire to progress would make Humbug their first big shift in sound. And after it, I don't think anyone could truly predict their next move. Following Humbug's release, Turner moved to New York and wrote some original acoustic tracks for the 2010 film Submarine. He would take one of the tracks from the score and re-record it for the band's next record.
You look like you've been for breakfast at the Heartbreak Hotel. Inside of
Turner began writing Suck It and See alone in New York before inviting the band to begin rehearsing and fleshing it out in Los Angeles. They'd record tracks in live takes, delivering a similar sound to Humbug, but poppier and carrying a retro rock sound. You have those heavier riffs in the first half. Softer serenades in the second,
when she walks, her footsteps sing a reckless serenade.
and even tracks that would hint towards what would come next. But the record's problem is just how middle of the road it is. It shed a lot of the psychedelic elements that made Humbug so fun, and they had yet to add the punchy grooves that made AM so great. If the album didn't carry some of Turner's best lyrics, it would be much less memorable. After a year of touring, the Arctic Monkeys had grown tired of playing the album live.
Whilst I think the last record has its merits, it felt like once we started playing it live, it kind of exhausted itself pretty quickly. And that's why we wrote Are You Mine?
Are you mine? Oh,
Are You Mine became the biggest crowd pleaser they'd written in some time, so they'd zero in on the track and make it the blueprint for their next album, AM.
why'd you only call me when you're high?
The idea behind it was to apply the compositional perspective of a hip-hop or R&B producer to a four-piece rock and roll band.
Yeah.
They wanted this new album to sound good in the car, the way something like 50 Cent's Into Club would. And to do that, they'd have to focus on the lower frequencies of tracks. So AM was mainly recorded with the bass guitar and drums laid down first.
I did a lot of writing to like a groove or something we recorded in this thing. Just the way it sounded like put me in a place.
With the emphasis on building grooves and the addition of layering and backing vocals, the record would draw comparisons to hip-hop and R&B. But you'll still hear the band's admiration for Black Sabbath in something like Arabella.
My days end best when the sunset gets itself. Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Michael Chapman's 1970 album Fully Qualified Survivor would also inspire Turner's mood while songwriting.
Fully qualified survivor.
Michael Chapman's Fully Qualified Survivor. I don't know if you know that record, but like I became very fond of that like a couple of years ago. There's a mood on that album which the feeling I got from spending time with that record is something I perhaps wanted to embed in some of the songs on this.
Or is this image of you and I, and it goes down.
Emulating Chapman is likely what led to Turner's accent sounding less evident than ever before.
I don't think I'm quite as explicitly Yorkshire on wax anymore.
Keyboards, pianos, and organs continue to find their way into their music. And the album's closer once again left listeners wondering where they could possibly go next.
I wanna be your vacuum cleaner, breathing in your dust.
What we ended up with was an album featuring the muscle of 70s rock with the sweetness of soul and R&B. Containing a massive amount of single power, it would help the record become the band's biggest release thus far. Only a slight shift in direction, AM sounded like where the band had been heading after their previous two records. But it was enough of a shift to divide the fandom, with comments that the album was bland and sounded like a parody of the band. But the Arctic Monkeys wouldn't stand still for long.
Everything that you've come to expect.
After extensively touring AM, Turner and Miles Kane felt the urge to revive the last Shadow Puppets. With more of a glam rock style and sound, Turner began writing tracks using an organ he had at home. At about the same time, Turner and producer James Ford would produce Alexandra Saviour's debut record, which featured a psychedelic chamber pop style. When finally sitting down to write a new Monkees record, Turner felt like anything he tried to craft with a guitar sounded redundant. But when Turner's manager Ian McAndrew gifted Turner a Steinway Vertigram piano for his 30th birthday, his imagination was reignited.
I didn't have any ideas for this album before I sat down at the piano. It's not something I've ever written on in the past, really. Looking back now, I love playing guitar, obviously. I played it like loads of it on this record. But as a writing tool, I think I'd sort of reached a point with it where it wasn't getting me anywhere.
With an interest in science fiction at the time, the frontman would create his own world to reflect and critique the real world. A dystopian moon resort named Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino.
Some science fiction do.
This new record would be built on that Vertigram piano, with film inspiring Turner's writing process more than music did this time around. It was Federico Fellini's 8½, a film about making films, which would lead to the first track, Star Treatment.
I just wanted to be one of the Strokes. Now look at the
I thought it was the thing I was going to write in order to like get to the place I needed to be, and I think you can hear that in like the words in the. I think I was watching a lot of films about filmmaking at that time, and the idea of like a song about songwriting seemed interesting.
Turner would envision the lounge clubs and films by Jean-Pierre Melville while writing new tracks. It's the very reason this record carries the atmosphere that it does. These vintage sounds for a futuristic space lounge.
back down to earth with a lounge shimmer, elevator.
These Jean-Pierre Melville films, which I became fascinated by. There's like a jazz club in all three of them. The clubs at the centre of these stories specifically like captured my imagination, I think, and when I was sort of writing some of this music, I was almost imagining these places being the backdrop. Like there's a point, I think it's at the end of like Le Samurai, where it kind of all goes down in this club at the end, and the final shot is it sort of moving away from almost to the point where you'd like see the stands and the lights, and there's something magic about that idea to me, like that it's not quite real.
I've got an entire video breaking down this misunderstood masterpiece, its themes, and the making of the record. I'll link it at the end of this video. But Tranquility Base is a psychedelic pop concept record with Turner's voice and piano driving nearly every track. Synthesizers would also play a more prominent role than ever before.
I want an interesting synonym to describe this thing.
Other elements, the drums, guitar, and bass, are still here. They're just simply turned down or repurposed to complement Turner's original demo recordings. The Arctic Monkeys could have easily piggybacked on the hook-heavy AM, but instead decided to release their most ambitious record to date, doing something very different than anything they had ever done before. The latest from the band sees them head even further down this glam rock lounge pop lane. It's more of that piano-driven art rock, a bit brighter and more expansive thanks to its inclusion of some beautiful string arrangements.
I had big ideas, the band was so excited.
With Turner living between London and Paris, French pop has definitely become a stronger influence on the band's sound. Film appears to still be a prevalent inspiration on Turner, as these tracks are some of the most cinematic we've heard from the band.
It makes perfect sense.
Sculptures of Anything Goes nods to some of the brooding atmosphere from Humbug, but it's still one of the least Arctic Monkeys sounding songs we've ever gotten.
With your horrible new sound, baby, those mixed messages ain't.
It's difficult to say where the Arctic Monkeys will go next. After Humbug, there were those that wished the band had never strayed from their punk rock roots. The groovy AM brought in a whole new legion of fans, but also left many feeling like the band had sold out. And I'm sure in 5 years' time, there will be a group of others who yearn for the piano-driven rock ushered in by 2018's Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino. But these records show a band's willingness to evolve, to approach writing songs in a brand new way, and the refusal to stand still artistically. To the right, you'll see another video about the Arctic Monkeys' journey, and another breaking down the themes and making of Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino. Thanks for watching, and keep listening.
Beautiful song.
Cheers, dude.